All right, welcome everyone as we get started here. All right, thanks for joining us today. All right, we'll allow one moment as everyone filters in, but thanks for joining us today. We are here to talk about the Federal Decree Law number 11 of 2024 on the reduction of climate change effects. And we are going to give a breakdown today about interpreting these regulations and what it means in the UAE. And today we have some wonderful featured speakers. So we'll be hearing from Alison Eslick at Reed Smith, as well as Mustafa Bosca from Carbon Sifr. And we do have some representation from AZRAQ as well. So why don't we get started with that? So here's a quick agenda for the afternoon. We have about an hour and a half to cover this information for you. So we'll start with an introduction around climate change emissions and adaptation. We'll get into the law and frame it in the context of other regulations in the UAE and the larger strategic vision for the country. We'll get into some of the details around the law. We'll talk about phases forward and stages of compliance. We'll talk a bit about value creation and strategic opportunities around the law and sort of the business case for compliance. We'll talk a bit about carbon offsetting, the carbon markets, touching on AZRAQ as well, and then we'll open up some time for discussion, ideally about 15-20 minutes to hear from you all and address some comments and questions. So again, I'm joined by some wonderful speakers today. I'll allow Alison and Mustafa to introduce themselves and then we'll get started. So Alison, if you're able to give a short introduction to yourself, that'd be wonderful.
Hi, my name's Alison Eslick. I'm a senior associate at international law firm Reed Smith. I have a strong interest in sustainability. Most of my practice is construction law, which is obviously an industry that is very implicated in climate change. And I'm very delighted to be talking on this webinar today.
All right, thank you, Alison. And Mustafa, would you like to give a short introduction to yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mustafa Bosca here. I'm the co-founder and chief decarbonization officer of Carbon Sifr. Carbon Sifr is a UAE-founded climate tech, enabling businesses and financial institutions to easily measure, reduce, report, and remove their emissions. And I'll be sharing with you some of the things that we learned by working with companies here in the UAE.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And myself, my name is Hannah Paulson. I am a consultant with the Climate Consultancy, and we're hosting this webinar this afternoon, hopefully to provide some more information around this law and get the conversation started. So very happy to be joined by our guest speakers today and looking forward to getting into it. So with that, let's get started. All right, so we want to open it up just a bit at the start. We want to understand a bit from you all and understand how you're presently preparing for compliance, if at all, and perhaps some of your concerns around compliance. And feel free to leave any of the answers and questions, comments in the webinar chat, and we'll moderate that as we go. So again, any concerns about maintaining in compliance, and then wondering how you all are engaging with information as it's released. Of course, there's quite a bit of information that we're still waiting for, so wondering how everyone is handling that information. And let me enable the Q&A as well. All right, there we go. Comments should be open. Would love to know how everyone is preparing and working through this information. And I do see a hand raised. Would be wonderful to maintain the chat if possible. All right, and if no one has any initial thoughts, that's wonderful as well. We can certainly get into it and see if that reveals any new questions. All right, from Sophia, here to learn about the law and how it might affect work moving forward. Absolutely. we'll do our best to relate the regulations as we see to certainly some of the small business owners in the room, and many of our Climate Club members represent companies as well, so we'll be good to make that connection for them. All right, we'll allow just another minute here. All right, following the European regulations and taxonomy and expecting the UAE to follow closely, absolutely, particularly for businesses who work closely with the European Union and perhaps even have exports and imports that need to follow a different set of regulations. Currently in the process of establishing a carbon emissions accounting framework at our company. That's wonderful. Mustafa is certainly someone that could assist with that. Understanding the law, how it applies as well. Absolutely. All right. Great to hear from you all. With that, let's get started. I want to provide just a bit of background around emissions in the UAE and how this law fits into the broader context of things. So looking at this diagram here, with the UAE current emissions and what it would take to align with the Paris Agreement NDCs and overall global goal to cap global temperature increases at 1.5 degrees Celsius. In the UAE, this is going to require a 50 to 63% emissions reduction, and this is quite drastic, and this will need to be reached by 2030. This means reaching pre-2015 emissions level. So if we look at the chart here, this sort of light pink projection here is where emissions will land by 2030 following current policy projections in the UAE. This yellow dot here is where the government has declared the most recent NDCs. So this reduction, this nationally determined contribution to emissions, is about a 17% decrease from current policy. And then in order to reach this very low emissions target, about 59% reduction, as we said, leaves quite a big ambition gap. So we've got a pathway to reach this 17% NDC, but we don't particularly have a concrete pathway to reach this 59% reduction. So this ambition gap is quite large, and many countries are facing this type of situation. So this regulation is one lever that we can use to try to reach this 59% reduction as we move forward by 2030. And of course, this is in line as well with projections to be net zero by 2050 as well. All right, so looking a bit deeper into the details here, in the UAE, the emissions come from a few primary sectors in particular. So energy accounts for about 85% of emissions in the UAE. This is as of 2023. And then within energy, power sector is very prominent, accounts for about a third. A quarter of the rest is based in industry and transport. And then, of course, we have about 15% fugitive emissions. These are sort of leaked emissions or unaccounted for, related to extensive oil and gas, methane flares, things like that. And then the remaining 11% is around industry processes, and then about 5% accounts for waste. Then we do have a small percentage here as well, about 2% related to agriculture. And if you're interested in learning more about this, 1.5 Pathways Explorer is a really great tool to look at the different breakdown by sector in the UAE and for many other countries in the region. So we know that climate adaptation and mitigation are national priorities. I want to spend just a moment on adaptation. So to keep pace with global and regional efforts, the UAE is going to continue to adopt regulations and strategic plans to meet goals. And every year they seem to be getting more stringent and more ambitious. And that's wonderful to see. So towards this, the Ministry of Climate Change and Energy has identified some of the leading climate risks facing the UAE. And again, this is not too surprising. We know extreme heat is a very big risk for businesses, for human health, for industry, in the region. We've also seen some extreme precipitation events. Water scarcity is a concern as well, overdrawing groundwater, and then land degradation just through development and expansion. However, there is an upside to this. So climate adaptation for business in particular is shown to save money. For every dollar invested in climate adaptation, returns about $4 in benefits. And this is comes from the World Bank. So cost savings can be achieved through a couple different layers of preparedness. We can prepare for damage prevention and secure our physical infrastructure from hazards. Operational continuity is important as well. By being able to perceive risk and plan around it, we can maintain production and avoid disruptions and minimize revenue losses and downtime. Energy efficiency is very important as well. Retrofitting our facilities to account for extreme temperatures and implementing some lower energy consumption practices is key. Supply chain resilience, by diversifying suppliers and creating some redundancy in the supply chain. In the inevitable event that something does go wrong, it allows for pivoting and some, as we said, some redundancy in the supply chain. And staff health and safety, by allowing for climate adapted workspaces, we can enhance employee comfort, productivity, well-being, and this reduces absenteeism, turnover, and downtime. So overall, why to prioritize climate adaptation, and why are we talking about this in relation to the law? There is an article in the law that describes climate adaptation practices, and we know very, very well that adaptation and mitigation, these sort of big picture activities and plans to reduce carbon emissions, is mitigation, and this adaptation component goes hand in hand with it. So we know it's the right thing to do. By preparing our business operations for climate hazards and vulnerabilities, we can maintain safe working conditions and keep our finger on the pulse of what is happening day to day. It's the smart thing to do. We can't avoid climate risk. It is coming for us. So we can avoid supply chain shortages, we can avoid threats, and we can implement some risk reduction strategies. And of course, the necessary thing to do, increased regulations, increased policies and practices are becoming a main lever to ensure compliance, ensure emissions reduction, and safer business practices. So just a quick summary again of mitigation versus adaptation. We talk about mitigation addressing the cause. This is carbon emission reduction. This is greenhouse gases in the atmosphere driving all these consequences that we later have to deal with through adaptation. So mitigation practices include energy conservation, waste reduction, switching to electric vehicles, addressing the root cause. Let's emit less greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. And then adaptation allows for addressing the impact. How can we prepare for extreme weather? How can we prepare for supply chain interruptions, worker well-being, all of that. And then ideally, we work towards this state of resilience where, regardless of the regulations, compliance requirements, we sort of reach this state after implementing enough adaptation and mitigation practices where we have this insulation barrier around us, where depending on how conditions change, it doesn't require immediate action. We're able to sort of ebb and flow with the changing conditions. It allows us to remain agile, but requires a lot less investment in the moment in a reactive way. So this is ultimately the goal, and the law is one way that we can move towards this state of resilience when we're discussing business practices. So I'd like to give just a brief overview of some other regulations in the UAE that help frame this new law quite nicely. So the UAE Vision 2021 gives a high-level framework for national sustainability, and the emphasis here is really on economic development, growth, innovation, and sustainability. And some attention is given to climate-related challenges like water scarcity and infrastructure resilience, but climate adaptation, this component of climate adaptation is really addressed implicitly. So the emphasis here is economic development and ensuring our economic future in the UAE. UAE Net Zero by 50 places a much greater emphasis on climate action with an explicit goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. And the goal is to build resilience to the effects of climate change. It integrates climate adaptation more comprehensively, particularly through resilient infrastructure, water security, and ecosystem protection. And then moving again towards this additional large piece of legislation is the UAE National Adaptation Plan 2017 to 2050. This creates the framework and the methodologies that lay the groundwork to develop adaptation policy. We name and we target UAE climate hazards, and it sets the stage for continued tracking and evaluation of progress and encourages this knowledge sharing and innovation around adaptation with global partners. So with this incredible momentum behind us, we can zoom out a bit and look at the flow of legislation. So we've covered these major components. And then in 2024, we also saw Cabinet Decree number 67, which had an emphasis on climate mitigation. And we'll hear more about the details that came from that decree. And then we have the UAE Climate Law, Federal Decree number 11 of 2024. And this emphasizes business compliance, monitoring, reporting, and verification, adaptation, and then innovation as well. So again, just want to frame the climate law here is really impacting these three pillars that we've been building momentum towards federally, but this one seems to be achieving all three components of economic stability and growth, climate mitigation, and adaptation. And this is really going to be key as we move forward and interpret the letter of the law to understand sort of where we're coming from and where we're headed. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Allison, who will give us a bit more detail around the letter of the law and ideally give us some more detailed breakdown of what to expect as we move forward. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Allison.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah, and to the Climate Consultancy for having me here today. I'm really delighted to give an overview of Federal Decree Law number 11 of 2024, which is the focus for the webinar. The first thing I would have to say as a lawyer is that I must give a disclaimer or two. So firstly, today we're going to give a high-level summary of the law. And this is for the purpose of trying to make it digestible for you all. But I really would encourage everyone who's in the audience to actually get a copy of the law if you haven't got it already. It is publicly available on government website, the legislation website for the UAE in English. And when you read it, you'll see that there are a few, terms and words that might be a bit vague and uncertain. And this is unfortunately quite normal for the UAE. But it's good to see the actual words used in the legislation because it will give you something to grab onto and you will remember things from the webinar when you're reading over it. The other thing I would say is it's a very brief law. It's 5 pages and I would call it an umbrella law. So essentially it sets the main ideas for the climate change regime in the UAE, but it leaves a lot of details to be described later by other legal instruments. The second disclaimer I would say is that obviously we're in the UAE, so that Arabic law is the version that's always going to prevail. I, of course, have based my talk on the English translation, and you'll actually notice that there are a few different translations in the market. But basically, you'll notice maybe some small differences if you check the government translation. I'm relying on a different translation, but hopefully it's not going to cause us too many problems because we're going to stick to the big ideas today. And then my third disclaimer is that what we have at this stage is the text of the law only. That's the only guidance we have, just the law itself. And this is because the UAE is a civil law jurisdiction and the legislation is essentially a code. We don't really have judge-made law that helps us understand the law. There probably will be some decisions in due course. I would expect those perhaps over the next few years when enforcement starts. But as of now, we don't have anything from the courts to help us interpret the law. So with all that in mind, let's explore what this law is about. So if you're looking at the slide here, what we've got a reference to two key legal instruments. And these are both federal instruments that apply throughout the whole of the UAE and all of the Emirates. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the UAE Climate Change Law, which is how I'll refer to it today. Or more specifically, the full title is Federal Decree Law number 11 of 2024, which is the law on limiting the impact of climate change. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see reference to Cabinet Decision 67 of 2024. And this is a decision, a federal decision, regarding the National Register for Carbon Credits. Now, the climate law applies to sources within the UAE who contribute to climate change. Now, sources is an interesting word. It is defined in the law as legal entities, for example, companies, but it also applies to individual enterprises whose operations or activities are releasing emissions into the atmosphere. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that Cabinet Resolution 67 gave more clarity to us as to which sources the law applies to. So these include entities emitting 0.5 million metric tonnes of carbon dioxide annually. And the emissions that are captured by this law are both Scope 1 and Scope 2. So Scope 3 emissions are not covered. Scope 1 emissions are defined in the Cabinet resolution as direct emissions from operations into the atmosphere. So, for example, a factory or a manufacturing process. Whereas Scope 2 is defined as indirect emissions resulting from consumption of resources such as electricity, energy, heat, steam, and cooling used in the operational activities and processes. So, essentially what the law provides is that huge emitters of more than 0.5 million metric tonnes of carbon dioxide must register in a national register for carbon credits, while lower emitters, so less than 0.5 million metric tonnes, can register, but they can do so on a voluntary basis. It's not mandatory for those entities. So going back to the left-hand side of the screen and the purpose of the climate change law, it does several things, but one of those is to provide for the establishment of the carbon credit registry. But if you're looking for the detail of the carbon credit registry, it's not in that law. You have to go to the right-hand side of the screen where we've got the Cabinet resolution, and that is where you're going to find the details. So essentially, we really are talking about two legal instruments that were very, very important in 2024. Now, who is required to register, or any details about the register are in that Cabinet resolution. Now, finally, going back to the left-hand side of the screen, the climate law requires sources, and these are these huge emitters, to measure, report and verify their emissions. And it applies to public and private sector, including the free zones. So we can move on to the next slide. Sorry, Hannah, I don't know how to move the slides. Okay, so in terms of who is affected by the law, yes, as I've said, it's public entities, private entities, and entities in the free zones. And also the focus industries under the law, which I'll talk a little bit about later, are these 5 industries, which are infrastructure, energy, insurance, health, and the environment. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit deeper into Federal Decree Law number 11 of 2024. The first thing I would say is that this law is highly significant for the UAE because for the first time, UAE climate mitigation is now a national mandate. So Hannah was talking before about the policies that have led up to this point, and we know that the UAE ratified the Paris Convention way back in 2016, but until now we've only been guided by the national agenda and other voluntary mitigation measures and policies that have encouraged people to reduce their emissions, but nothing was laid down in a law. Now, as I mentioned, the law is not very detailed, but there will be more tailored controls to follow. The second point I would make is that it is now clear that implementation of the law is going to be phased. So this is not a one-shot game. This is something that's going to be rolled out over the next few years. And we know this because we have Cabinet Decision number 67 of 24 on the National Register for Carbon Credits, which now makes it mandatory for the huge emitters to register in the carbon credit system. But as I said previously, this only really applies to those huge emitters. So they are very much the focus of this first stage of the regulation. We also haven't seen anything about Scope 3. Thirdly, I want to emphasise that Federal Decree Law number 11 of 24 only empowers the Ministry of Climate Change to establish the registry. So as I said before, the details are in the carbon credit law. Fourthly, a big part of the climate law is, of course, monitoring, reporting and verification. So we've now got some explicit obligations for sources determined by the ministry to keep records of their emission quantities. And they have to do that for 5 years. So if sources are not yet measuring their emissions properly or tracking them, they really do have to get ready to do that now. And finally, there is that sector-specific approach that we mentioned. So getting into the details here, we have Article 4 there up on the screen. Now, the law lists 8 measures that designated sources can take to reduce their emissions. So you can see there, it's not an exhaustive list, and in fact, it's pretty vague. For example, it refers to improving energy efficiency, using clean energy. So questions are going to arise, is nuclear a clean energy? Is using natural gas clean? Well, it's cleaner than coal. But, what does all this mean? I think the prescription is going to come later. But there are at least 8 measures that are listed there in the law. You've got Article 5 there as well on the screen. So it's clear that the ministry will determine annual targets on a sector basis. And these targets are going to be updated periodically, which I think is an excellent development, because this is the only way that sources who have to report are really going to focus. Article 6, this is where you're going to look if you're a business that needs to comply or wants to comply in a voluntary way, because this is outlining the monitoring, reporting and verification provisions. And this is where the obligation arises to keep those records for 5 years for the purposes of auditing. Now, if you want some more detail about reporting and what is required, you will have to go to Article 4 of the Carbon Credit Register Law. And this gives more details about the specific greenhouse gases that must be covered in your reports. For example, it's not just CO2, it's methane, it's hydrofluorocarbons, etc. So there's much more detail in that second resolution. And finally, Article 7 identifies 5 key industries of focus for the ministry, which we mentioned before. So moving on to the next slide, if you really want to remember 5 things about the law today, it's that number 1, climate mitigation is now a legal obligation, at least for those huge emitters for the time being. Secondly, mitigation will be guided by targets, which will influence which sectors must reduce what and by when. Now, from my side, I'm not aware of any industry-specific targets that have been released. I've checked the media, I've asked colleagues. The industry I'm most interested in is construction, and we haven't seen anything specific as far as I'm aware, but hopefully these are on the radar soon. Number 3 there on the screen is really the cornerstone of the law. So monitoring and reporting is, of course, what allows for the verification and ultimately the enforcement. This is a huge part of the law. Fourthly, it's clear that the ministry is setting standards rather than specific actions for emission reduction. So the ministry sits at the top, the Ministry of Climate Change. However, it's really going to be other competent authorities that are going to be setting the details for all of this. In order to keep up with where things are, it's important that you come to sessions like this, keep a dialogue, get on your WhatsApp groups, speak to the Climate Consultancy, because I think the way laws are issued in the UAE is sometimes very dynamic. It can happen without notice, and we've sometimes seen laws issued without much publication in the media around it until several days after it actually happens. So finally, the final takeaway here is that there is more regulation and policy to come. So you need to really be watching for it. So moving on to the next slide, I think I just want to give an overview of the timeline. So the climate law is being rolled out in a staggered way. And I think this is making it politically supportable. It's allowing businesses to adjust and get ready for what they have to do. So it started back in 2024 when the law was published in the official government gazette. Tomorrow is the day that it enters into force, which is 9 months after its publication. However, there is a grace period. Sources who are subject to the law have 1 year to adjust their operations to fall in line with the law. So it won't really bite from an enforcement perspective until 2026. And even then, the law actually expressly states that the adjustment period or the grace period could be renewed or extended. In my experience, when significant changes like this happen in the UAE, and sometimes businesses are not so good at keeping up, the government does tend to listen. It wants to work with businesses and help them, and there may be a further extension. At this point, we don't know, so all we can do if an entity is subject to the law is to really get ready for it. And finally, I think we should just have a quick look at the penalties for non-compliance. So this is what we're really getting ready for in June 2026. So in terms of enforcement, how much could non-compliance cost you? Well, under the climate law, it's up to 2 million dirhams. Under the carbon credit decision, there's a range of 500,000 for first-time violations, 1 million for second-time violations, and 2 million for third-time or more violations. So in terms of these, I do have a question in my mind as to when enforcement will be truly active and how the market will respond. Of course, these seem like large fines for some businesses. For other businesses, perhaps it's a cost of just doing business. I think we have to watch and wait to see how this will play out. And I think before we hand it over to Mustafa, I wanted to just go over some of the Dubai structures that have come into place. So we can't forget what's happening in Dubai Emirate. Dubai Emirate actually has a history of legislating and making policy even ahead of some of the federal government. So I suspect that Dubai, whilst it's going to obviously follow what the federal regime is doing, and it can't do anything inconsistent, I'm hopeful that Dubai is going to make its own regulations and policies around climate change. So you can't just watch the federal level, you need to watch the emirate level. So as an example, Dubai Law number 11 of 2024 established a new authority, the DECA, which is the Dubai Environment Climate Change Authority. This is essentially the new Dubai entity that will deal with anything climate related in terms of strategy and planning. I could not find a website for this organization yet, but it does seem they're operational and they're entering into MOUs, as you can see on the screen. So they are operational and up and running. And this entity will drive the regulatory framework in Dubai and set the policy for climate change. It has 37 listed competencies and several related to ocean conservation, which I know will be of interest to AZRAQ. And then last but not least, my final slide is around a steering committee that was formed in Dubai pursuant to Executive Council Decision number 32 of 2024. So this committee is staffed by the entities on the screen, and it's clearly a very diverse range of stakeholders, including Dubai Police, the DEWA, the Department of Finance, and others. Now, this steering committee is the temporary committee, and its purpose is to help the transition of climate-related powers held by these stakeholders to the DECA, so the new Dubai Authority. And it's very clear that what's happening is that Dubai Emirate is consolidating and centralising its climate powers into one place, the DECA, rather than the old approach, which was to have the powers spread out across different entities. So I'm hoping that this is going to better support what's happening at the federal level under the new climate law. And I think it's time to hand over to Mustafa.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Alice and Hannah, for getting us started and the information around how the law and the regulations are going to be shaping up. I'm sure some of you might already know who we are as Carbon Sifr. So we have a partnership with AZRAQ for the past almost 2 years, long before the law came into effect. And we are working with businesses in UAE to do actually 4 things. We have a technology, a carbon accounting platform, where we are helping businesses to measure their carbon footprint and emissions according to GHG protocol, and that will be you'll be very much in line with what we already know about what needs to be reported. So if you're doing your, let's say, measurement and have your processes and methodologies built according to the GHG protocol, you will be well covered for the regulation. Then, of course, off of that, our technology will allow you to report whatever reporting requirements will be. And we are, like as some of these regulations come into effect, we are updating our technology to make that possible for our businesses. We do help on the reduction opportunities, and as this slides highlight, and our partnership with AZRAQ and several other project developers is to also help you remove your carbon footprint, and this will as well be a viable option to show progress according to what your baseline will be. Next slide. And AZRAQ is an amazing entity that we've been working with for the past 2 years. They are predominantly working towards protecting the oceans, and they have had huge impact over the years. And what we do with them is help plant mangroves through some of their partners, as well as you can adopt a coral above and beyond, like your reporting requirements and your reduction. These are, like giving some options here in the UAE to contribute to the environment, and we are the technology enabler for AZRAQ to achieve that. On the next slide, what I would like to talk a little bit about is whatever is you're going to be doing will require some investment in terms of technology, in terms of people, in terms of processes. And our technology at Carbon Sifr will, of course, make all these things as like seamless and easy as possible. But as you see, the law is shaping, and you'll probably be doing things. You want to do certain things upfront as you prepare for what is coming up. And most of the time, your CEO, your like managers will ask, why should I do this now? And or like this investment that I'm doing right now, is there any other way that I can create value out of this? Right. So it's at the end, measurement, reporting is based on a well-defined methodology, and like ours, there are systems out there who will help you with that. But then, if you want to take whatever you're doing one level up, you need to show value creation, and also get buy-in from like your colleagues and your senior management. And in order to think about this, we've been already working with a number of large businesses. You need to think about from three perspectives. You in the center taking climate action, then how do you extract value from your suppliers, and how do you extract value from your clients, and how do you get your banks and investors to basically fund the journey as you are making some of those reduction investments and planning and implementing the reduction initiatives. I'll share with you a few examples of how some of the businesses in the UAE did on the next two slides. So as Alison was mentioning, actually the way how the government policy and objectives cascade down to businesses in the UAE is not always through like very, very clear and strict regulations. And long before the law, actually, there were a number of things that the government was, like putting in place, and large businesses like Careem, Al Share Dubai Holding, Aldar have been already, like preparing themselves for that, right? So Careem, after COP28, the government wanted them to do a number of initiatives, and we helped them do one thing, which was, like basically come up with an eco-friendly car type. And this is going above and beyond the electric vehicles. Any car type that like you would be taking, any car that you would be taking through an API, if you select eco-friendly, you will be able to come up with the carbon footprint of that ride and contribute towards buying carbon credits and also planting mangroves together with AZRAQ to basically remove that carbon footprint. Now, you will say, okay, why do I do something like this? What does Careem benefit? And what could this mean for my customers? Something like this, like coming up with a carbon neutral or eco-friendly product. If you look at what has happened over the last 18, 24 months, more than 300,000 rides were carbon neutral. More than 100,000 customers came into this paid and extra. So what this shows here is that here in the UAE, you have a significant number of customers out there who are looking for eco-friendly and carbon neutral or low carbon sustainable products, right? And this constitutes actually like almost 10% of Careem's rides with very, very, very little marketing actually, right? So one of the strategic opportunity for you to think about above and beyond measuring and reporting is how can you create some of these eco-friendly products and extract more value from your customers. The second thing is around, like Epic Foods. They are the umbrella organization for some brands like Poke & Co, Acai & Co, etc. The reason why they wanted to start doing, but they were, they have an amazing team. I mean, both of these companies, they want to do something good. But of course, you're running a business, and whatever you do needs to create value. So they were applying for a government loan or a loan that was going to be issued by a government-owned bank, and that bank asked them long before the law, what is their carbon footprint and what are they doing to reduce it, and how they are, like basically preparing themselves for the upcoming law, etc. And we helped them measure their carbon footprint across their entire operations, and above and beyond that, help them come up with low carbon neutral meal options. And this became the second best seller for them in just, like less than 6 months, right? So again, this is showing that customers out there are looking for these opportunities. As an, like when you start preparing for this law, you can, like also think about how you will extract more value from your customers. On the next page, for more, like supplier and bigger ecosystem type of plays, we are working with Dubai Holding. They had already started, measuring their scope 1 and 2, but they wanted to take it to the next level, to measuring their scope 3 emissions. And if you're working with Dubai Holding as their suppliers, for example, you might soon hear from them, like what you are doing towards also reduction, etc. And here as well, they had to, go through huge amount of data cleanup and data readiness, which is an important element of your, like measurement and reduction. And our technology helped that. But in the meantime, as we were, as Hannah was highlighting, we identified for them cost-saving opportunities, changing some suppliers, changing some countries of origins for certain things that supply, to see, okay, how can they reduce cost and reduce their carbon footprint at the same time. And this goes, Dubai Holding is huge, as you know. This goes from, let's say, cleaning materials bought for Ibn Battuta Mall, all the way to the concrete and cement that is being used to build the new Jebel Ali palm, right? Similarly with Aldar, that's a customer facing opportunity as well. They were again asked by the government to do a number of initiatives long before the law, and we helped them design a program for their hospitality branch, brought together a number of brands that they own hotels with, and asked the customers to join a program where they commit to reduce their carbon footprint, and as a result get some discounts. And here customers were able to get, like up to 60-65% reduction in their like carbon footprint of hotel stays in Aldar owned hotels, right? So these are a few examples that I wanted to share with you. So above and beyond measuring and reporting, you can definitely think about making climate action, sustainability as a strategic lever for value creation for your business. Of course, you want to avoid the fines when they become, effective. But above and beyond that, cost savings, engaging your suppliers from a different perspective, and having a different conversation with your banks and financiers and investors, and as well as getting more customers engaged are some of the strategic opportunities that you can think of as you're preparing for your business case to invest the necessary systems and the people and the processes to prepare for the law. And both the Climate Consultancy and us will be more than happy to help you in building that business case and move towards not only complying with the law, but also creating value with the climate action that you're preparing to take. All right, I guess.
Thank you, Mustafa, for that. So with that, let's open it up into a bit of a discussion. I do think there have been some comments filtering in through the course of the presentation. So let's start with a few of those. And overall, folks asking about the slide deck and all of that to be shared. In just a minute, we'll provide a QR code that you can scan and access the slide deck. And then we've also put together some additional resources that we'd be happy to share with you. All right, so let's go just a bit towards the beginning, some of the questions that arose. So we've got a question: what baselines will be used to establish entities expected to register? Alison, could I pass that to you?
Look, I mean, what we have in the carbon credits law is the 0.5 million metric tons. So we did have clients coming to us saying, okay, you know, getting quite confused actually about whether they should be registering. Some clients weren't actively measuring yet, so they didn't quite have a handle on whether they could meet, you know, whether they should register or not. And some were thinking to voluntarily register, but then they were not clear on what that would all entail. So there was a lot of hesitancy, confusion actually around that. I don't know if Mustafa has anything to add on the entities that he's working with, and you know, how they were deciding whether or not to officially register as opposed to just taking measures to track their emissions.
Yeah, the businesses right now are preparing in terms of like baselining their emissions. As far as I know, there hasn't been defined a set baseline year. So these will probably become you know, like more and more you know, like clear in the coming months. But as I mentioned, the government was already encouraging the largest businesses, top 50 to 100 businesses in the UAE, to start measuring and taking some action. And I think with the as the law becomes more you know, like clear on how it will be implemented, this will be cascaded down to the suppliers of those entities. So they started with scope 1 and 2, and they're now moving into scope 3 and understanding. And these are like some of the largest you know, like businesses here in the UAE. That's what is happening. And in terms of the registry, another opportunity what will most likely become apparent, and one of the reasons why you want a baseline today is you will be able to trade, I think, your reduction credits as well, right? So that's let's say you baseline, you started into your reduction pathway, and I think you will be able to register these and be able to trade at some point some of those reduction achievements as well. But again, how and what will qualify, etc. We do not know that, but it's expected that will be possible as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I've got the law here on the carbon credits, and one of the last provisions of it says the minister will be issuing implementing decisions deemed necessary for the implementation of the provisions. That's Article 17. So it's foreshadowing that there is something more to come. I would have hoped that it would be ready by now, but we expect it probably in the next few months, I would say. So just watch this space.
All right, thank you for that. And thanks for the question, Begonia. And Dragana, hopefully this answers your question as well around how do we know if we are within the threshold if a company has not conducted that baseline measurement yet. So my understanding is this law, particularly with how much information we're waiting to still be rolled out, is that there's pressure to just start conducting these baseline assessments, and then implementation will likely cascade down, starting with those huge emitters, the top 50 companies. And if that's not you, this is not likely something on your radar for the next few months, but likely we'll start with those huge emitters. And then my guess is that this will additionally target some of the sectors where we have the greatest reduction potential, and the government can really work with them to have some huge reductions occur. So that's my sense. So hopefully those answer the first few questions there. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Dragana. So insights on companies will be mandated to report first instance. So yeah, again, those top emitters. All right. On the original version of the federal law, we have a comment that says, noting that penalties ranged from 50K to 2 million dirham. Thoughts on that? We did have a slide that I believe mentioned 50,000 dirham up to 1 million dirham, and then 2 million dirham, depending on the repeats. But Alison, yeah, any clarification there?
Yeah, I mean, I've got the table in front of me here for the carbon credits law, and the fines are 500K, not 50K. So 500 is a bit more. I apologise if there was a typo on the slide. It was 500K for first-time violations, 1 million for second-time violations, and 2 million for third-time or more violations. There's more detail and prescription in the annex to the law, but the fines are set out in there, and that's the range.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Alison. So, yep, 500,000 to 2 million. And again, in the resource that we'll provide on the next slide, we'll have a QR code where you can download this compilation of resources we've put together. We've got the actual law in there. We've got the Cabinet Decree number 67 and some additional information from the government in there. So you're feel free to go through and read the letter of the law if that provides some more detail for you as well. All right.
And I think the person who asked that question, it's interesting because it's a 500,000 dirham penalty for entities with huge carbon emissions, and those who voluntarily participate and opt in who don't measure their greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a fine for not measuring. There's also a 500,000 fine if you don't deliver the report that you're supposed to deliver annually. So that's another 500,000 dirhams. And then in the case of these huge carbon emission entities who don't fulfill the reporting requirements, it says stipulated in the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is also a 500,000 dirham fine. And it says in the case of not abiding by any other provision of this regulation on the carbon credit register, that's also a fine of 100,000 dirhams. 200,000 for the second time penalty and 300,000 for the third time penalty. So there certainly are a lot of different penalties for different things, and it's worth having a look in there if you're assisting your business to understand what their exposure could be.
Perfect. Thank you for that level of detail, Alison. That's very helpful. All right, I see another question, perhaps for Mustafa on the Green Voyager program. We have Dragana asking, do you track what is the overall carbon emission reduction and how many customers participate? And noting that the 67% reduction is for customers who do participate.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, what we do is we calculate per guest what the emissions are. And then for those who are participating, they commit to certain actions. So let's say you're coming from London to a hotel in Abu Dhabi. There are a number of things that you can do to make it, your journey and your stay as lower emissions. Like, for example, instead of going to the airport by car, taking the train, taking certain types of aircraft. And once you land here again from the airport to the hotel, using an EV car, etc. And while in the hotel, committing to do certain actions, and then that, if you're doing, I think, all of the suggested things, it is reaching to 67% reduction in the overall, carbon footprint of you as a guest. And that's and those who participate are given some rewards by the hotel.
It's a very interesting program and a very nice way to put the personal decision in the hands of customers to be able to decide towards an emission reduction practice through something they typically already do. So that's a great initiative there.
Yeah, and they get rewarded with it, which is, like amazingly good. Yeah, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Much easier to make the choice when there's a bit of a financial incentive. Absolutely. All right, and then I do see we have a few questions focused around the guidance for submitting reporting, emissions reporting. Perhaps is the guidance to submit through GHG protocol, or another framework. We've got someone asking if the advice is to follow GRI standards. Mustafa and Allison, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. My understanding is that we are just awaiting information from the ministry on the best way to submit and the correct way to submit these reports, but wondering if you've got any additional thoughts on details for reporting.
Yeah, no, I think in one of the documents, whatever is required is a bit there's some more detail around it. But what will be, as I was telling in my presentation as well, if you're using an international standard like GRI, SBTI, TFCD, or the GHG protocol, which is the umbrella for all these, right? So you will be very well covered. So all you will need to do is just like let's say a separate reporting that puts things in line with the law's requirements. But any of these standards will be you will be well covered in terms of being prepared for your baseline and tracking your reduction pathways.
All right. Allison, any other thoughts on that?
I'd probably have to have a bit more of a think about that question to come back with precisely the right answer. I mean, Article 6 is the main provision in terms of the registration and certification in the National Register for Carbon Credits. Certainly, there is a certification process that's going to happen, but it is quite technical. And I would need to come back to the lady or gentleman who has asked that question.
All right, thank you for that. It looks like we might need a bit more reading, and I'm sure we'll need a bit more time on questions that have on guidance that comes from the ministry on the best reporting standards. All right, another question here. Carbon credits work best when there's transparency in price discovery and liquidity and the ability to trade offsets. Is there clarity on exactly how trade will work in the UAE? Really great question.
Yeah, no, very, very, very good comment, right? So, of course, you have voluntary carbon markets. They work over the counter and goes, from various different quality levels. And then you have these, let's say, regulated carbon credit markets. And with this carbon registry, I think UAE is going towards building that national carbon registry and ability to trade the credits. We're just starting, right? So, and it will take time. But there's also another thing that happens, right? So it's there are various ways to set prices. So you can set a national carbon price, and then you don't need to then try the market to be, allowing that price discovery and all that. I think there are some countries which do that, set a national carbon price. So I think I don't know what UAE will be applying. I think we will see it in the coming days. But I think in order to get the market going, just setting a national carbon price to get things started might be the way until there is, sufficient number of participants and liquidity that would enable price discovery.
Yeah, I'm personally very interested to see how the internal carbon market for the UAE will be set up using this law to kind of establish some oversight and structure for that. So yeah, interesting to see where that will go. All right, so let's jump over to some of the questions that are coming through the Q&A. And we will start here. Is auditing and or verification by external entities expected to be in place following the ESRS context?
I can take you, and I thought we had another question on the reporting as well that I saw pop up there, so maybe we can answer that as well. But it's Article 4 of the carbon credits instrument, that gives some more detail around the reporting requirements. So some of it is some of it's a bit vague, I think, as Mustafa mentioned. So it refers to the process for reporting emissions as including basic standards approved in the Greenhouse Gas Inventory Protocol, which is actually an annex to the decision. So there is a sort of form that has to be filled out there, a standard form that asks certain things. In terms of the process of verification, Article 4.3 states that the process of verification includes having the report verified by a verification body, and that's according to the standards of the International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, in terms of the general principles and requirements for ISO 14065-2021 and the reporting standards. So that's the prescription that they're giving there in terms of the verification. There are other references to other ISO standards as well in the law. So I think you have to pay close attention to what those articles are requiring.
Thanks for that clarification, Alison. And just want to do a quick circle back to some of the penalties around reporting and registering with the carbon credit registry. So we mentioned the penalty is 50,000 dirham, according to Article 15 in the current law that we're discussing. So not less than 50,000 dirham and not more than 2 million dirham. And then there are, as we said, additional and separate fines that come into place related to Cabinet Decision 67, and the two dovetail and are quite connected. So certainly watch the fines as it may relate to your business. All right, so next question I'm seeing here is, let's see, the Green Voyage program, we discussed that as well. Emissions thresholds, certainly need to measure those before we get into compliance. And baselines. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions, but I do want to keep it open in case anyone has any other thoughts, comments.
I actually have a question, if it helps, if no one else is asking anything. In terms of 0.5 million metric tons, to me, I'm not a technical person, so I don't know how much that is and what kind of entities that would apply to. Mustafa, what kinds of entities is that realistically looking at to comply?
Yeah, that's a very huge number. So most likely the types of businesses that will be emitting that much is just like some large energy companies, very large industrial manufacturers like cement, steel, oil and gas, etc. Right, so that's a huge amount of emissions, and it's mostly the process industries and oil and gas and things like that. Yeah. When it comes to scope 1 and 2, I mean, as soon as you include scope 3 in that, but of course right now it's all about scope 1 and 2, then it very rapidly many businesses will be falling into that category if you start including scope 3 there.
Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you all for your questions. I believe we've addressed everything. So at this point, we do want to share some of the resources we've compiled for you all. So scanning the QR code you see here will give you access to this compliance checklist we've put together. And this includes a compliance calendar. It includes a list and downloadable PDFs of all of the federal documentation that we have access to at this point. It includes a compliance checklist that we've compiled, and this includes measures that directly relate to the law, and then also how to integrate these themes into broader business strategy as well. So both directly related and in preparation for the future. As we wrap up this webinar, we'll upload the slides here as well, and then you'll have access to the slide deck. So again, just scan the QR code there and you'll be able to access everything that we've got all together in one place, and we will be following up with access to the slides as well. So I want to share that. And then next slide, please. All right, so with that, we'll wrap up. Again, you can download the content above, and feel free to adopt a coral and support the wonderful work that AZRAQ does for ocean conservation and carbon sequestration as well. This can be done on a corporate level and an individual level. So always happy to support AZRAQ. Thank you so much, Mustafa and Allison here from Reed Smith and Carbon Sifr. Feel free to reach out to us at any of the provided contact information there. Or if you happen to miss anything or have an additional question, please reach out and we'll be happy to connect you with an expert that can answer it for you. All right, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, the webinar recording will be available as soon as we wrap up here. All right, thanks so much for joining.
Oh. Okay, thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulties in the beginning, guys.
No, it's okay.
No worries. I also lost audio about halfway through and had